Good evening. I'm Bill Densmore. I represent the Greylock Independent, which is a nonprofit community service that provides a monthly newsletter and a constantly changing website about civic issues in the Williamstown and Greylock region. And we're here at the Williamstown Public Library, the Mill Public Library, to have a conversation about connections, about what we can do to make sure that the Greylock region stays current with the technology that's delivering broadband internet services to our region. And the reason that's important is because more and more our lives are affected by the way we access information. And the way we access information is increasingly over a pipe, over an internet connection. And as services around the country are more and more organized around video and things that take a lot of bandwidth, it becomes more and more important that we as citizens have access to a lot of bandwidth. Now, for some of you watching this, you're saying, bandwidth? What's that? We're going to learn a little bit about that tonight. We have a really great panel of folks to talk about it, and I hope we can have not just a you talk, we listen conversation, but a real conversation of the people in the room here. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to start, though, by recognizing Representative Gail Cariddi, who you see up on the screen in front of us. Representative Cariddi is the House Vice Chairman of the Legislative Joint Committee on Economic Development and New Technologies at the State House. And the reason she's on the screen is because she has a 2.5 to 2 3/4 hour commute to work. And so she goes down on Tuesday morning and she comes back on Thursday or Friday. And to ask her, although some people did drive quite a ways to be here tonight, you could imagine if she had to constantly be coming back and forth to meetings in the Berkshires, it would be a tough thing. So I thought, since this is a conversation about connectivity, that it would be a good idea to see what would happen if we use Skype. And it's pretty interesting that Representative Cariddi is out in the open, somewhere in eastern Massachusetts. She was joking that she wasn't even exactly sure where she is. She's at a rest stop. But there she is with her cell phone talking to us. So Gail, I know you've only got about 5 minutes before you've got to move on to your next appointment tonight. But I thought you'd like to help us frame tonight's conversation and talk to us for just a minute. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Bill. And happy to see that as you kind of whirled around the computer there, I almost got dizzy when you were showing me the crowd. Yep. But I do appreciate you letting me chime in here for a bit, and how apropos it is that I am on Skype. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, you know, in the legislature, as many of your panelists, or probably all of your panelists know, the state and federal government has been working on these issues for several years and have begun a good partnership to bring the backbone of infrastructure up through central and portions of western Massachusetts. And I probably should interject a bit on Verizon. I did talk to a fellow at Verizon who said he couldn't join you tonight, but did want to say that they are a partner in bringing the lines through, as they are very cooperative in letting the entities that need to connect to the poles that they have, so you won't have to put up new poles. Obviously, this is a critical component to our growth and economic development in the western region. I think that it's every bit as important as physical infrastructure, if not more important than physical infrastructure, because this is our new highway. And you guys get a lot of credit for starting this community meeting and bringing it right home to the Greylock region area in Williamstown, because this is the peak. This is right where we need it, right where we need it most, and we need to work on it and help finish up the last mile.
Gail, thanks. before you go, I just want to ask if anybody in the audience has a particular question that you think would be best addressed to Representative Cariddi. Otherwise, I think we should let you move along. Any questions? Quickly? Okay. Gail, thank you so much, and I appreciate the fact that you wanted to be with us tonight, and that you'll be keeping an eye on what we're doing and helping where necessary in Boston.
Well, I can see the panelists that you have there. Yep. These are key people, so yep. Have a great meeting.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, good night. So let me now introduce the folks who are going to kind of get our conversation started this evening. And I think after you've heard them, you'll probably have lots of questions, and I hope that we can have a real conversation. This will not be just 5 people talking to each other tonight, I hope. And so let me start by just telling you quickly who's here. And I've asked each of them to, after they've been introduced, to talk a little bit about why they agreed to join us tonight, what they hope we can accomplish as a group tonight. Let me start by introducing Don Dubendorf. Don is an attorney. He's been an attorney in Williamstown for most of his professional career. He's studied and worked on statewide internet broadband access issues for more than 2 decades. He's president of Western Mass Connect, which used to be called Berkshire Connect, and a director of the Mass Broadband Institute, which is a division of the Mass Technology Collaborative. He's also a director of the Mass Technology Collaborative and vice chair of the executive committee of the MTC. So we really have right here in Williamstown one of the key players in expanding broadband access in Massachusetts. Next to Don is Ben Greenfield, whose company is called Cogs Inc. He's based here in Williamstown. He's a technology consultant to the Calder Foundation in New York City and is down there frequently in New York City, but he's here because Williamstown is a great place to raise a family. He has been working for a while on an effort to manage the launching of a sort of neighborhood broadband project, and I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about that. He's got 24 years of experience building interactive systems for businesses, museums, and individuals. Next to Ben is Adam Chayet. I hope I pronounced your name right. Adam works for Berkshire Fiber Connect, LLC, which is in Great Barrington, and he is one of 2 people here tonight who is connected to this fellow in the middle, which I'll explain in just a second. Adam and Mark Bouvier.
I'm Mark.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Bill Stathis.
Adam and Bill Stathis both work for organizations that work with the fellow in the middle, Mark Bouvier. Mark Bouvier works for Axia Networks in Boston, which is a for-profit company that has a contract from Mass Broadband 123, the high-speed internet service provider that's owned by the state, the pipes from Boston that are owned by the state. They're responsible for figuring out how to get people connected to that. But the people who actually do the connecting are folks like Crocker and like Berkshire Fiber Connect. And there's actually a total of, I think, 12 of them statewide. So you see 2 out of 12 here today. So Mark, as I said, Axia. The last person here is someone who really deals with this stuff on the ground. Teresa Martin heads the Lower Cape Community Access Television Organization on Cape Cod. She has journalism and education degrees. She used to run some Silicon Valley startups. She advises on broadband issues to the Cape Cod Technology Council. And she represents something in between the individual consumer. For most of us, this is kind of an opaque world. And the folks who are really in the middle of it, sort of a larger scale user. So I'm going to stop there, get out of the way, and ask each of you to just go across and just talk for a couple of minutes, and then we'll see where we are.
Terrific.
Don.
Let me start with a couple of disclaimers. Unlike the rest of the panel, I have no training in this arena. I am self-taught. So there are gaps in my professional abilities when it comes to broadband. I became involved in these issues in 1997. The Berkshire Legislative Delegation came to me and said, we have a problem and we've decided we want you to fix it. I told them I knew nothing about the problem and didn't have any expertise. The first thing I told them was, if you want me, you better fund this thing. So they came up with some startup money and off we went. I'm also not here on behalf of all of those organizations I serve as a member of, here as an individual citizen. Let me tell you something about this. If technology is to realize its promise of being able to help us overcome geography, if technology can overcome geography, then we better take this seriously, because we are in a challenged position. It is a beautiful place to live, but it's not proximate to Boston or New York or Hartford, and we suffer from that isolation. And we will continue and have for many years suffer from that isolation. We still wrestle with the fundamental question, and that is levels of service and the cost for the service we enjoy. I'm glad to hear that Verizon is cooperative. They haven't always been in the last, what is it now, 18 years I've been working on this problem. And we will encounter, and Ben has already encountered, some issues as we look to access network pole lines and pole networks and the rest. But I'm here to tell you that one of the goals that I've had as a player in the policy deliberations is to say that in the absence of this, we will devolve into classes of citizenship. There are cities, there are towns in Western Mass that simply cannot connect to the Department of Revenue. Cannot connect to the Department of Revenue. They have no ability to do so. And if you know anything about municipal finance, you know that you can't function as a municipality without proper interactions with the Department of Revenue. It's a question of education. I mean, you all know this. If our children, who are widely referred to as digital natives, guys like me are the digital immigrants, if we don't resolve these things, we will have less than high quality education for our young ones. And the economic benefits of this are real. An MIT professor by the name of Sharon Gillette, went on a quest several, probably now 12 to 15 years ago, and tried to measure the GDP differential between those communities that were connected and those that were not sufficiently, and proved that there was a substantial difference in rates of growth and economic vitality. That's been the foundation of the commitment that the legislature, Gail Ann referred to it, both state and federal, have funded this effort over these last 17 years in an amount north of $100 million. Cape Cod Connect is a beneficiary of some of that funding as well, so you'll hear more about that. But I'm here simply to say that at the end of the day, what I like about fiber to the premises is that I'm told it's future-proof in many ways. In other words, it won't become redundant. It's an investment we ought to be considering, because it's not something that will get bypassed by future technology. I've heard lots of debate about whether or not cellular capacities will obviate the need for fiber connections to premises. And the best minds I've been able to encounter say no. So I encourage this discussion. I'm excited about it. The needs are real. We'll have challenges, both challenges of will and of politics and of resource. But if one thing I've learned over the last 18 years is, if the ideas are good, we'll find capital to support them. MBI has a middle mile network. It is currently underutilized. It connects all of Western Mass to the outside world. It has enormous potential. We are in the process of making the Commonwealth of Massachusetts one of its largest customers. And so there's lots more to do, and I'm excited about tonight's discussion, and I'm glad I'm here. So thank you. Ben.
Hi, my name is Ben Greenfield. I live at 58 Linden Street. I've lived in Williamstown since 2002, and my wife and I both work remotely. You know, I travel a lot more than she does, but we end up spending a lot of our monthly income on bandwidth. So I've been watching, we should all thank Don for the work that he's done to get, MBI to the point where it is, because we've actually, all we have to do is the last mile, which is great. A lot of places in the US that's not the case. And so initially, I was watching it slowly grow, slowly grow, slowly grow, and then when the CAIs were supposedly lit, which is a community anchor institution, and we have a few of them around town, and the idea was that the MBI would run fiber to those places, and then the community could spread out from there. So now it's our job to spread out from these community anchor institutions. Initially, I went to the select board, all excited to let them know about this. And they were, naturally skeptical because, it's going to be millions of dollars. And they thought that maybe a pilot project was the way to start. So then, I broke it down to the smallest thing, I could imagine that would provide me with the internet access that I would like. And then, if the town wanted to do it, they would be able to see what it was. And if they didn't want to do it, at least I would be happy. So, what I'm hoping to get from this is that other people contact me around town and say, I want to put some money where my mouth is, and let's grow this pilot project. I've gathered a lot of notes and materials and cost estimates on various methods of installation, and I have my own ideas on what is best. But I'll wait till more people gather. So that we can have that conversation.
Just a quick insert here. Stuart Burns suggests that we all try to decode acronyms when we use them. And also, you mentioned community anchor institutions. The sheet up on the wall there is pulled from the Mass Broadband 123 website. It actually lists all the institutions which have, go ahead.
Which are not all wired. I have a list that's been edited by Peter Folan and Andrew Groff that is an accurate representation of Williamstown's community access.
That's interesting because the website lists them as connected.
Yes, yes, I was under the same misunderstanding, and I thought that it was going to be really cheap to wire Williamstown, but now it's just going to be less expensive.
Let's move on, but let's come back to that question because the issue of connected and what you actually. Go ahead.
When Don was speaking, there seemed to be some kind of difference between cellular something and the other something.
Wired versus magic.
Yes,
right?
I apologize for that. I apologize for that. Wired is straightforwardly just as it sounds. It's physical connections using various media, but what we would be talking about here is fiber, what is essentially glass fiber. These gentlemen can explain it much better than I can, but it is a set of physical connections that allow data to pass from point one to many other points. It's a series of physical connections, okay? Exactly. Yeah, Hopefully we don't do a system of wires, we do a system of fiber because it has more capacity and all the rest.
Hyper-technically, fiber is not a wire, but it looks like a wire.
So it acts like a wire.
Right, it acts like a wire.
Yeah.
So the cellular piece is that there's been a lot of evolution, and again, there are many more expert than I, but there is lots of ferment, technological ferment, that allows your cell phone or other devices to connect to the internet over waves of energy and the rest. And we know what a cell tower is, we know what a cell phone is. As that technology evolves, it's become much more powerful, much more powerful. It has capacity to do many of the things that a wired system might do.
Okay, and are you and Ben, for starts, promoting either one of those?
I'm only wired. I think wireless is not worth the effort.
Yeah, I've participated in the expenditure of a lot of public money in a wired universe, so I better be committed to it. Otherwise, I'm going to be hung.
Are you two disagreeing? I missed some of
No. We're 100% agreement.
Okay.
Let's skip now to Mark Bouvier, because I think what you can do is if you explain where you are in the ecosystem, it then naturally flows to the two gentlemen on either side of you to explain what their piece is.
Great.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, and thank you all for your interest. It's an important topic, as Don and Ben both discussed. And our role, Axia NG Networks, is the middle mile operator.
Middle mile decode.
Middle mile being the connection of the network throughout to each town within the Commonwealth, here or Western Mass. So basically the network originates in Boston, runs through Springfield on Route 2, along Route 2 and along the Mass Pike for all intents and purposes, and then is distributed from there to each city, town within Western Mass. There are approximately, so within each town, we are connected in a building or multiple buildings. So in a very small town, we might just be in the town hall or a school or police department, public safety. In some of the larger towns like Williamstown, we're in multiple institutions. We have a termination here in the library. So the network is distributed to each city, state, or city and town within the state, here in this part of the state. But so Axia's role is to ensure that those connections are managed and build service, support. If there's a problem with the network, we're there to come and we're here to fix it. And we also, so from a distribution standpoint, we rely on what are called retail service providers, or RSPs, and the RSPs talk to the end users about actually purchasing the service from MBI through our company. Okay? So MBI is the owner of the network, Axia is the operator of the network, and then we've got Crocker Communications, Berkshire as well, Berkshire Fiber, who are actually managing the relationships with the folks that are purchasing it and utilizing the bandwidth.
So just
Does that
again,
make sense?
Yes. Mass Broadband Institute, quasi-public organization, so in effect that bandwidth is owned by the public.
That's correct.
Okay.
Infrastructure.
A very
Right.
quick question.
It's an open, it's what's called a
Open
access network, which means that everybody can have access to the same services at the same costing.
One of the things that's hard for people to grasp is the capacity of that network. Is there some way you can put in this way what, for example, that pipe along the Mass Pike would carry? How many people who have 10 megabits to their home, which is sort of a typical cable connection that we might have now, how many of those could that pipe support? Is it
Unlimited.
Millions?
Unlimited.
Yeah, everybody.
Okay.
It's a very robust system.
Okay.
Right.
Very robust.
So as a practical matter, the bandwidth that already exists in Williamstown is unlimited.
Correct. For
Okay.
all intents and purposes, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Question?
Just at this point, could we talk about the library?
Yes.
As far as
Let me see if I can introduce that question. We still know that we've got 3 more people to bring into the discussion here. We talked briefly before we got together and earlier with the librarian about the situation here. And let me see if I can summarize it quickly. The bandwidth that's available wirelessly within the library here is actually supplied by Time Warner, free to the library, because that's a contractual requirement of Time Warner's relationship with the town.
Correct.
There is also in this building bandwidth supplied by over MBI's Mass Broadband 123 network, which powers the terminals in this building that are connected to the CW Mars card catalog, the digital card catalog. And that was set up by Crocker Communications, which Bill will explain in a minute. But what's interesting is that the 123 into the building here is potentially very fast. However, it's not really, for all practical purposes, available to the public in this building, except if they're trying to access the CW Mars catalog, which needs essentially almost no bandwidth at all because it's text. But if you want to watch a video in the library here, you're having to use Time Warner's connection, which is only 10 megabits, which is just barely fast enough to stream video. So can you guys talk about that dichotomy of the fact that there's essentially unlimited bandwidth in the basement of this building, but the public doesn't have access to it today?
I think it comes down to cost, right? I mean, the
Okay.
relationship with Time Warner is that you get the bandwidth and you don't pay for it. It's a contractual agreement. But really that bandwidth is built for cable TV, some browsing, that type of thing. It's
Yeah.
not really built for multiple people getting onto the network simultaneously and downloading all different types of services, whether it be text or video or music or whatever it happens to be that someone would want to access the internet and utilize from here.
So Mark, what would your company, how would your company answer this dichotomy that we're talking about here? How are you addressing it in South Berkshire, where I know you, Adam,
Yep.
how are you addressing that in South Berkshire, where I know you're particularly active?
Yeah, Fiber Connect is based in the Great Barrington area, so we focus more on South County at the moment. We've gotten contacted, so we've come up to Williamstown. We actually have a couple customers up here. I think Mark said it well. Fiber, what the state has put in has opened the door to sort of an unlimited or nearly unlimited amount of bandwidth, certainly more than we can chew right now. I'm sorry. I'll try to scream. We're mostly focused on the fiber extensions right now. We're looking at some last mile pilot programs to try to see how the communities will accept what we're doing and price points we're looking to offer and the kind of bandwidth and services that we're looking to offer. I think the situation you have here in the library is sort of echoed throughout the county. Still not loud enough? Okay. There's a lot of community anchor institutions that do have existing bandwidth, and then there's this fiber sitting there and it's not being utilized yet. I think all of us are working to try to change that and open their eyes to it. We see the potential in it, both in economic development, in growth potential, and everything else, what it will offer for our kids and businesses and the community at large. So it's been a learning process. It's been educating the public on what the differences are. And, the network has only been lit for a little over a year. And I know everybody sitting up here has been working very hard to get the word out.
Yeah. Bill, talk about it from Crocker's perspective. You two are competitors, but you're also kind of friendly competitors in some sense. You're both dealing with the same issues. How are you tackling them?
I like Adam just fine. We've broken bread together.
We have.
So it might be useful to understand the economics of what's going on in this library and other libraries.
Yeah.
C.W. Mars is a cooperative of libraries. They share not only local catalog where someone in Williamstown could say, I would like A Dance of Dragons by the guy who does the Game of Thrones books, name escapes me, George Martin. And they don't have it here, so it's located in Dalton, and they make arrangements for the book to be transported here so that the person can pick it up. So that's one of the functions. There's also other back office sort of functions that C.W. Mars performs. C.W. Mars pays for a circuit to this library. It has two economic components to it. It's not unlike the way electricity is sold these days, where there's transport or delivery, and then there's the actual juice. You can now split those two, and you can have your transport by Wamico or whoever the local power company is that owns the power lines, but you can get your energy from some other entity. It's similar in the broadband world in that we have transport, And that's a component of the economic picture. And then content isn't the right word, but it's the actual internet, getting to the internet itself. So we buy transport from Axia over the MBI network. That gets us from Williamstown to our 2 points of presence on the network, one in Greenfield and one in Springfield. From there, we access the broader internet, and we can deliver that internet content, whatever content the end user wants. So our price to a library or any other CAI takes into account our cost of transport, which is MBI, and then our cost to buy from a tier 1 internet service provider like Sprint or Comcast or Cogent or Light Tower, and then turn that into service that a library can use. Those two components put together add up to X amount of dollars per month, and then the library ultimately has to pay for that. So although there is virtually unlimited, it's really the limit is a gigabit of bandwidth available in the basement.
Which is 1,000 megabits per second.
Correct.
Right? So just to put that in perspective, again, a typical home might be 10 megabits. So he's saying a gigabit is 1,000 gigabits.
Correct.
Yep.
But the library's budget may only support 5 or 10 or 20 megabits per second, even though there's virtually unlimited bandwidth available in the building.
Well, now you sent me an email, Bill, which I appreciate, in which you provided some of the pricing for Crocker Broadband over MBI.
I did.
Yeah, and you said 50 megabits, Crocker Broadband 50 was $870 a month?
Correct.
Okay. I did some testing at a private residence in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is charter. Actually happens to be my mom's house, okay? She pays $50 a month for her internet.
Yep.
And I tested and I was getting 65 megabits a second.
Yep.
For $50 a month. So how can you compete if you're charging $870 a month when I can go to Worcester and get it for $65 a month?
So it's a frequently asked question.
Yeah.
To preface the answer, you need to understand that Charter and Comcast and Time Warner spread their cost over literally tens of millions of customers, and we've got 1,100 CAIs here in Western Massachusetts. So it's a whole different economic structure. But we do occasionally, so for example, we recently signed the town of Shelburne over to our network. Haven't placed the order yet, but we will be shortly. They're keeping their Comcast circuit in, and they're just going to use that for internet, and we're going to use the MBI network to port them over from Verizon service over to our voice service, and we'll actually save them a couple $100 a month versus their Verizon bill. So we have become creative at finding ways to deliver an economic benefit to towns, even if Comcast or Time Warner or Charter exist in those towns. But if it's a straight up bandwidth for bandwidth competition, internet access, it's a losing game for us. We can't compete.
Okay.
If I might add to that, what the anchor institutions are right now is basically an expansion of that middle mile, that infrastructure. And the type of service and the level of service you're getting with those types of circuits is very different from what a last mile solution would be, whether that be fiber from any of us or a Time Warner or Verizon. What we're all offering right now through these anchor institutions are bi-directional. So if it's 50 meg, it's 50 meg up, it's 50 meg down.
Right. That's an important distinction.
Yes,
yeah.
it's very, very low latency.
Yeah.
It's very high performance, and they're point to point. So you're not really sharing that path with anybody else. Whereas a last mile solution, you're basically, there's an aggregation of end customers. Well, to hit the kind of price points, it's typically, right, you're going to have this aggregation of customers over this fiber infrastructure. And then there's a single point that they all come to and then connect to that middle mile. So it's a very different level of service. When you talk about the price differentials between them, that accounts for most of it.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. You've really got a residential service here with Time Warner, residential grade service. And what I mean by that is that it's oversubscribed, as Adam and Bill are kind of describing, meaning there are literally thousands of users that are kind of channeling their access through a much smaller access point or gateway versus here where so you might be online at 65 meg at that particular time of the day, but as the day progresses and kids get home and they jump online, or people, that will impact the available bandwidth, which will then impact the performance. So really, it fluctuates. And for an individual in a residence, that's not a problem, right? Unless you're really streaming high bandwidth.
Our family, we have to subscribe to Time Warner Business Class, which, is $300 a month. But in that way, when my wife and I have to communicate with our offices, we're communicating with them. Otherwise, they say, well, you're only paying $35 or $65, so, you won't really miss this information.
And so even at that rate, you're still oversubscribed, and they don't guarantee the bandwidth. Right. So in an environment at home, depending upon what you're doing, so let's say I'm a radiologist who has in these rural areas, they need to be able to have high quality, reliable, dedicated bandwidth to their homes. They will not be allowed to work out of their home offices if they don't have some sort of a high-end dedicated connection, which was not available at all to those users prior to the MBI network coming into place. Yep. Here, in this type of environment, the challenge tends to be this sort of cross-section of cost and need, right? So as our needs change, and I want to access bandwidth for my own purposes, and I want to come here and do it via your Wi-Fi, the more folks that start to do that, and the higher end type of access they're looking for in terms of what they're streaming or what they're uploading or downloading has changed. And so that Time Warner connection is no longer going to be adequate, and people are going to complain, geez, the Wi-Fi connection at the library is just terrible. Well, that's right, but it's free, right? So now you start to kind of say, well, where do we meet that point where we say, maybe it does make sense for us to work a cost into our budget associated to better Wi-Fi availability here in the library for the public to access.
Teresa, Martin, talk to us about what you've heard so far and how it maps to what's going on the Cape.
Okay, so first I want to say is that I've been working at the intersection of technology and business and community and information for several decades at places across the country. And that what we see here isn't unique or unusual. And that's actually kind of sad, and that's a much bigger issue. I've worked a lot with economic development and community development, and that's really what this is about. Do communities want to control their own infrastructure and their own destiny? What is a community's return on investment? Historically, what happened in this space is, the for-profit companies, rightly so, are driven by making the most amount of profit. So they're going to put investment into those projects which will return the greatest return for their shareholders. In telecom, that was based on density of population and demographics. So you have people who can afford to spend a lot packed in closely together. We're going to get a great return. We have to run less physical fiber, less physical stuff. We'll make more money. So the investment had historically happened in urban areas, in certain suburban rings and certain clusters of business. Because why wouldn't it? I mean, if you're working for Verizon, you can't go to your shareholders and say, oh, I feel warm and fuzzy and I love this town and so we're going to run some fiber there. I mean, you can't do that. But communities have a different return on investment, right? The metrics of success are not just how much are we returning to our shareholders. And so to me, that's where this discussion really happens. Now, one of the things that I think you guys have gone through, I have a lot of acronyms that I just kind of want to try to make some analogies because I find it's hard for most people to get their mind around the way this kind of big picture thing happens. There's sort of three parts of this process of getting you and your information to someplace else or back again. For 40, 50 years now, we've been investing in kind of the internet backbone. It's global, the government's invested in it, companies have invested in it. It's kind of like the big reservoir of data in the sky, of the ability to move things around, really big pipes up in the sky. It's the you know, interstate highways, if you want to do a road analogy. More recently, areas like both the Cape and here realize that this thing called a middle mile network, that's kind of a new phraseology. It came through after the American Investment and Recovery Act that spawned this thing called BTOP you've been hearing about, which was basically $11 billion to create 21st century infrastructure. The middle mile is the piece that's like the water main. It moves from the big data in the sky down into more localized areas. It's the state highways, if you will. This last mile thing that people are talking about is like, what faucet do I put in my house, and how do I make sure I've got a pipe that goes to the water main to get a nice big wide shower or a little trickling fountain or whatever it is I want. So you need appropriate technology in all three of those places to make it work. And if you come back again to the needs and what it is a community wants to do, that I believe has to drive the technology question. So I'm not, everything has to be wired or everything has to be unwired. I think it's important to say, what is it we want to do at what point in time, and which solutions will move us on that path of getting us where we need to be. And that's a really hard discussion, because first you got to decide as a community what it is that's important. Now, what do you hope to get out of this kind of investment? If it's economic development, what does that really mean? Are you targeting certain kinds of industries? If you are, how does the technology and investment you select dovetail with that? What other kinds of outreach are you going to do to drive that economic development to be successful? Remember, broadband's just a tool to an end. In the end, we hope it's healthy communities that we can live and thrive in. But that's a really important discussion that has to happen, and you don't need technology knowledge to have that discussion. You just need to understand what's important to our community and how can this tool help get us to there. Does that help make sense?
Great. On the question of cost, do you have any numbers about what bandwidth costs in the world you inhabit on Cape Cod?
It's all over the place.
Okay.
I can say, again, I'm speaking only for myself. Mm-hmm. I can say that I've seen a trend that because of the investment of federal money in alternative options, it has helped push competition for the first time ever. And that's been really healthy, and it has helped to make prices tick down a little bit, but not nearly as much as in other places where there's significantly more competition. And here's the other little dirty secret. I probably shouldn't say that to you guys. Everything's negotiable, right?
Not my world. Open access, right, Tom?
Actually, open access, big deal. That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Open access is what the incumbent, which is Verizon and Comcast and Time Warner, they want to own all their own stuff and control what's on it. So let me tell you a story. I did a project a number of years ago called Unwired Village, and we were building a series of public access in public spaces. So I went to Comcast, which in my region had some ability to carry data, and we want to buy this capacity from you. And they said, no, we don't want to sell it to you. So a couple of senior centers that really wanted to be part of this access, because access was important, couldn't be part of it. I ended up actually dealing with Verizon, who at least said, oh, you're going to give us money, we're happy to deal with you, give us money. They're within their rights to say, no, we don't need to sell to you. So as a community, I think you got to ask yourself, if we want to control our own destiny, we need to be able to work on an open access network that has to sell to us no matter what we're going to do with it, as long as it's not illegal, that are going to sell at a fair price, and we have to have the technical ability to connect. They're not going to hold our hand and babysit. So that's why open access is so important, because companies do say no, and it's in their right to say no. And that's, as a member of the community, that's wrong.
Don, can you unpack this idea of open access a little bit more, particularly from a legal perspective and
well,
and a First Amendment perspective?
Yeah, let me do the First Amendment piece last. It's the least interesting. The public likes it, but it's the least interesting aspect of it, to tell you the truth. Let me start at a different place. This question of open access is critical because if you look at the incumbents.
The incumbents, unpack that.
Okay, the incumbents out here are
Time Warner,
Time Warner
Verizon.
and Verizon. Let me start with each of them. Verizon isn't going to be in the land business, or the landline, the wired business in Western Mass, in my opinion, very much longer. I think those days are numbered. It considers itself in many ways. Look at its income statement. It considers itself a cellular company. Doesn't want to be in the landline business, the wired business. It's been selling chunks of its network across New England, and each of those have struggled. Each of those buyers have struggled to make a buck in that business. So Verizon's behavior over time is going to be hard to calculate and rely on as a planning function, simply because its business model in the wired universe, if you will, is under lots of pressure. Lots of pressure because of the new ways to access the world of information. That same competition is affecting the Comcasts and the Time Warners of the world. If you look at that universe, everybody right now is trying to merge with everybody else. And only the Justice Department and antitrust laws are standing in the way of that. And I don't think that will be for long either. The question of how we access the internet and how we provide whatever we want from it or need from it is going to bypass these restrictions that we've grown up with. I.e., we're not going to supply you internet for your unwired village on the Cape because we don't want you to compete with us. We don't want you to make decisions about programming. We'll decide those and you'll take it.
We don't want you to have a reasonable upload speed.
Exactly. We don't want you to have these things. Because then you're a participant. We don't want participants. We want people who pay bills.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We want people who pay bills.
So the point you're making is the difference between symmetrical and asymmetrical access. Like, for example, most of you who have internet at home, if you've ever noticed this, you'll notice that the rate at which you can upload information to somebody else is much slower than the rate at which you download information. That keeps most of us from being contributors rather than takers. And what Don is saying is that's the way they want it.
That's their model. That's always been their model. We want you to watch and participate in ways that we've determined are in our best economic interest. By the way, I'm not suggesting anything immoral about this. No. This is the model. I mean, it supports what we've enjoyed for so many years. Fact of the matter is, there are now alternatives that are increasingly attractive at different price points. And that's going to make the incumbents more and more unreliable as partners in this discussion about what we want as a community. Yeah. Verizon is going to exit this business eventually. It would sell Western Mass in a flash. It has disinvested in its infrastructure in Western Mass for decades. There's something called POTS for an acronym, plain old telephone system or service, POTS. It has been deteriorating in quality in Western Mass for decades because of disinvestment, chronic disinvestment. So as we think about these things, you're going to see in this public debate, well, what I have is good enough for me right now. Why should I vote? Why should I vote for a Prop 2.5 override for a bond issue for millions of dollars to upgrade this system? It's good enough for me. The fact of the matter is, there's something false in that premise, and that is we can't continue to rely on the incumbents for what we're enjoying now. They're not going to be reliable partners going forward. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to agree with you because I think there's another really good analogy for towns to think about. 100 or so years ago, a handful of towns in this state, sure, and many more in other places, said we're going to control our own destiny with power, yep, right? We're going to run power lines. And today, those towns are in the really fortunate position of having significantly lower power rates, well-maintained lines, local jobs, right? That's important. We don't talk about that. But when you have a local utility, those jobs live in your community.
And as another aside to that, the town of Concord, Massachusetts, which has a municipal electric light company, is also offering broadband internet service to its
so is the city of Holyoke, and doing it about as well as you can. I mean, they have
been since the 80s.
Yeah, that's a remarkable performance on the part of that city.
And through a partnership with Crocker, the little town of Leverett, just outside of Amherst, is in the process of putting, fill us in, what is going to be the sort of standard offer speed that people in Leverett are going to get?
There's only one, 1 gigabit to the home, turn it up all the way.
So 1 gigabit versus roughly, so that's 1,000 megabits per second, and what most of us have in this town is around 10 megabits a second. So move to Leverett if you want to get 100 times faster.
That's the wrong. Stop yourself, Bill. That's not the message. That is not the message.
Well, it is the message that we're sending unless we do something about it.
I agree.
So a couple of a reality check on that.
And then let's get some audience questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we touched on the subject of oversubscription, where, you know, if you're on an incumbent's network at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the kids get home from school, you see a deterioration, and then when the parents get home from work, you see even further deterioration. Some would say that that's the same thing that Leverett has done, is just introduced that same sort of oversubscription. It's really not true, because a well-managed oversubscription is invisible to the end users. It's transparent. They don't know that it's being oversubscribed because of the bursty, and you'll hear that word a lot in association with the internet, the bursty nature of the internet. If you click on a web page, and you've got super fast broadband, it downloads in a blink of an eye, and then you kind of contemplate it and you think about what you're going to do next. And in the meantime, that same thing is going on all over the place, interleaved together, so that the end user perceives lightning fast speed, even though they're sharing the bandwidth with a bunch of other users. In a well-managed, well-constructed, oversubscribed network, it's transparent to the user, and that's what we have in Leverett. It's not necessarily what you have amongst incumbents that are using different type of technology. Right now in Leverett, just to sum up really quickly, they're about 80% complete with the build, and we're about 60% lit customers. We should be 100% lit by the end of August. There's 820 homes in Leverett. We have about 620 subscribers. We think it'll level off at about 700, which is a subscription rate of somewhere in the 85–90 percentile range. So it's Leverett is turning out to be a smashing success.
Yeah, it's a home run. It's a home run.
Yeah.
How did they pay for it?
With tax bond, issued a bond, and it's being paid for out of tax dollars. The typical average, I shouldn't say typical, the average homeowner or property owner in Leverett is seeing a $25 per month increase in their taxes, about $300 per year. If you add that into what it costs for unlimited, no-capped gigabit speed internet and unlimited phone service, which Crocker provides both the internet and the phone service, that comes out to about $95. It's probably going to settle in at $85 once the network is well established and all the subscribers are on board. So you've got $25 plus, let's call it $90, $115 for excellent internet, as fast as you could ever want it. Symmetrical, it goes just as fast up as it does down.
So they can be contributors, not just observers.
There's a guy on the network right now that uploads for 15 minutes at 2 a.m. At gigabit speed, because he's basically got the network to himself every night. I don't know what he's doing, but he's doing it. And just to finish up, they did an analysis, and they compared that with Verizon DSL, if you have it, or Hughes, or Blue, whatever the Blue satellite.
Wow.
Blue, it's not Blue Rhino.
That's propane.
Blue something, which is internet over a satellite dish. And even though their taxes are going up by $25 a month, their overall spend for information access is going down by about $200 per year. So Leverett, in part, sold, there was a crying need for it in Leverett because there's no cable TV company, but in part sold it by doing their homework and figuring out what the economic impact was on 4 different tiers of average homeowners. And that's why they got a 90% approval rating on their votes to override Prop 2.5.
So we've got about 20 minutes left before we have to start moving out of the library. And I'd like to encourage questions from the audience. And what I want to just say is that because Deb Dane and her team are recording this for WillieNet, for us in the town tonight, raise your hand and let Deb get to you with the mic so that your question can be heard by the audience looking at this later. So go ahead.
Gil's been waiting longer, and then maybe I could go after Gil.
Okay.
I'll be very quick. I would like to get back to the...
Introduce yourself also, if you will.
I'm Tila Zasloff. What else do I need to say? I'd like to get back to questions which you raised about need, but nobody was answering. So I would like to hear a little reflection in the room. Just take Williamstown. The people who are using internet now as users, not investors, but users. What do you scope out as the need in Williamstown for a different system? What is it?
I have a scope that I think is a pretty accurate description of what we would need. But you know, I think that it's probably really not worth describing because you know, it's such a large group and we have such limited time. But I'm happy to meet with you anytime, anywhere, to talk your ear off about it.
Can I add to that? Because I think it's really important for the community as a whole to talk amongst itself as well. Because every community has different things that they value. So when you say economic development, is that important? What does it mean to us? The application within the school and the education community, right? We have MCAS are going away, parks are coming in, it's online, pretty much no school.
Decode parks.
That's the replacement for the MCAS testing in schools.
And it has to be done
It's going to be done, there's like a kludgy other way you can do it, but do you want to be the town that has the kludgy other way? No, I don't. So how important is it to be part of your educational system? Some towns deal with digital divide issues, either by income, by age, by some other component where parts of the community have stuff and others don't. Is that an important priority for your community? That's something the community as a whole needs to talk about and really come to understand.
Well, I think we just say yes.
Yeah, the
right?
answer is, do we want to talk about changes in the way healthcare is delivered?
That's an excellent one. An excellent one.
Let's talk about Williamstown. We are getting older. We are getting fewer. We might even be getting poorer. Do we want to talk about the way we want to care for each other in the healthcare setting? There are now legions of stories about how doctors in Pittsburgh are helping a surgeon in Africa do remote surgery of the most extraordinary kinds.
Or even just the Council of the Aging, you know, could have, you know, a single Williamstown or northern region that, you know, connects us all together.
So there's all sorts of aspects of this need question that we ought to have lengthy discussions about.
Yeah.
And those discussions are not pie in the sky. When these folks say it's almost unlimited, you ought to think about that in terms of what that means to your collective imagination. Can we be as good as the promise of unlimited bandwidth that we might otherwise decide to afford? Can we be as big as that?
And is greater speed that important?
Precisely.
I'd like to answer that just as someone younger in the average audience. I mean, so my name is Will Vincent. I'm a software developer. I'm 34. I don't work for Williams College, so everyone assumes I'm self-employed, because if you don't work for Williams, you're self-employed. I'm here by choice because I like this area. If I can't get fast internet, I'm gone. Ben here is gone. I know 24 people who are gone. So if you want white-collar jobs other than Williams College, you have to have internet. I mean, you have to have more school funding, you have to have mass transit, but those are so much more expensive than having fast internet. So, you know, having a terrible Time Warner connection stinks, and it's expensive. So it's another reason why it's a challenge for me to live here, and I want to live here.
Will you be sure to come to me after this meeting so I can get your name, phone number, email, etc.? Other questions? Keep it moving.
Can we accelerate this discussion? Because
Okay.
I don't think I doubt there are very many people in this room that have any doubts as to the value and validity of what we're hearing and the crucial importance to this community educationally, keeping and attracting young people. We have to have that if we're not all going to turn gray. So why don't we just get to the bottom line and say, what is it going to cost us to bond this? And what would be the savings to the average citizen in this community? We're all spending a lot of money on internet access, telephone, internet, and so forth. It sounded to me as if it's cheaper if we as a community bought into this right now. We fund this as a community, and we're all going to save money. Am I wrong about that analysis?
No, and we're actually in better
What
shape.
I'd like to do, excuse me, what I'd like to do now is get a whole bunch of questions on the table because they may overlap. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, first of all, this is a very enlightening discussion, but it leaves me with more questions than answers for sure. And a few of us here have come all the way from North Adams, and this is a very much a Williamstown-centric discussion, it seems to me, as usual. But I understand this was for the Greylock region, and so those of us in North Adams are very concerned about being disenfranchised in North Adams, and so I'd like to have some focus on the North Adams situation, twice as large as
well,
Williamstown.
I think the same discussion could be had in North Adams, in Great Barrington, in any of the towns, in any of the cities and towns where MBI terminates and where you're served by another provider.
Other questions to get on the table?
Some don't even have a provider today.
I don't think this is so much a question as just a point that I work with about half a dozen.
Your name?
Brian Hanspicker, Practical Markets, assuming you care. And I work with half a dozen different startup companies, most of whom are actually have their internet presence through Los Angeles, because that's where we can get the cheapest, most symmetric connection to the internet. To be honest, in the modern world, it almost doesn't really matter whether it's Los Angeles or North Adams, but I got to tell you, it certainly would make me feel better if at 3 o'clock in the morning I could run down to the local internet center and deal with a problem with the servers being down than have to try to get somebody in Los Angeles to fix the problem. I would love to get an internet center started in the northern Berkshires, because I think there's a huge opportunity here to bring in people who really care about software and the internet and communications and social networking, and who would love to turn around and live here in the bucolic Berkshires. But we got to have the ability to connect up to the internet. That requires this kind of a system.
Internet center, great.
I'll hold it. I got it. I'll hold
I'm
it.
sorry,
And you don't have to lean. It's a really powerful mic.
I'm Roger Bolton. I just want to say, in answer to Tila, and consistent with what other people have said, it's not just we in the room who need to be consulted about the needs. It's the people who aren't here, or people who are here but have one foot out the door and who might leave. There are lots of people, not just entrepreneurs, but other people who would like to live here but are essentially prohibited by their needs as they perceive them, either as consumers or as entrepreneurs or whatever, for access. So we can't simply rely on what we say we need.
Other questions to make sure that are on the table? Yeah. Andy Hoagland is the...
Andy Hoagland, Williamstown. Related to Paul's question, would be more focused on what will be the process for deciding the financial cost of doing this. I'd like to know what the project is. It sounds like it's not putting up poles, but it's stringing lines on poles. So to explain what the project is, what the process would be for determining the range of costs, so you can sell this or not sell this. Mm-hmm. And also, I appreciate that Ben and Don concluded that a cellular system was inferior to a wired optic system. I'm curious why you came to that conclusion. Because if we need to sell a product, they both will have obstacles. I'm curious why we pursue one path versus the other. Thanks.
Other questions before we go back to a general discussion? Harry?
Hi, Harry Montgomery. I'm a local resident. Couple of things on my mind. One is I like the emphasis. I don't always agree with Paul, but what is to be done, that is a big question. And is Time Warner hopeless? We know Verizon is. If Time Warner isn't hopeless, I have the impression they got their license renewed rather easily recently, just upping our little tax for WillieNet. But we've got to have some sort of threat to Time Warner, or they're not going to wake up. And is there any way we could mobilize enough to make them worry when they aren't coming up to performance expectations? The other thing on my mind is something I'm not well trained on, is the possible cooperation with the college. And it's hard not to talk about the college here. And I have the impression that there could be some overlapping interests. And also, it's part of, like schools, it's part of making this town a place that the sort of people you want to keep in town, and the faculty you want, the kind of place they want to live, and the wife probably has that online business. So.
Yep. While you're getting to the next question here, let me just observe, and I think it's behind you, that just FYI, about 2 weeks ago, we invited Time Warner to be present here tonight, and they said that they were busy, they had other schedule commitments. I did talk to the gentleman and asked if anybody else could come. He said that everybody at Time Warner had schedule commitments tonight, and that they couldn't come. So, however, there is a gentleman here who I hope we can recognize before we adjourn, who used to work for Time Warner in the area and might be able to represent the point of view of Time Warner. So, go ahead.
Deborah Schneer.
Yep.
For 5 years, and mostly in New York, but I started my career up in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and so I know the other side, I guess, and I hear a lot of comments, and I hear the negatives of the problem that they do have with a shared network. Time Warner on the business side, though, also has a fiber network. They do the same thing that some of these gentlemen are doing up here, so they're not blind to the need. Now, whether they're going to build that network throughout all of Williamstown, probably not. Would they build it down Main Street and try to pick off all the businesses they could and compete with these guys? They certainly will. So they're not going to roll over and play dead, but on the other hand, you're right, they're not going to be in that position where they're going to service everybody either. So it is a difficult situation. And I'm speaking from both sides. It's difficult for them, and I'm not defending them because I'm not there anymore. But it's also difficult for you guys as residents and consumers who want higher bandwidth. And just on the side, I approached the city of North Adams personally and volunteered to help them with some of the issues we talked about, attracting people like him and keeping people like him. I grew up in Adams. I left 30 years ago and never went back because there was no opportunity, and there isn't any opportunity anymore. Anybody drive through Adams lately? I mean, it's bad. And so I went to North Adams because I knew that they had some, their initial discussions in their strategic plan, they put the word broadband. And so I tried to, through Gail's help, I tried to make some contacts, and kind of fell flat. And didn't get a lot of interest from the people who make decisions in North Adams. So I'm not saying maybe it was me personally. So I kind of know all the pieces. I don't know what the answer is, but I think the answer is try to involve all the pieces, whether it's political, whether it's these guys up here, whether it is Time Warner. There's other fiber companies out there. The world is changing, and he's right. I think Verizon is going away. But on the other hand, you see these new fiber people in there growing all the time, Light Tower and Fiber Light, and I deal with them all the time, and they're building these large networks. Now, whether they're ever going to get down to service you at your home is another question, and I think that's what Ben's funded on now. So, hope that helps.
Okay. Go ahead. Yep.
Thank you. I'm stuck on something that Mr. Dubendorf said earlier about landlines are going, Verizon landlines are going to be out the window pretty soon, because where we live in North Adams, the only good reception we have is through our Verizon landline, cannot get cellular connection inside the house. So I don't, this is a puzzle to me, and put it out there.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else with like a 30-second question, and then I'm going to kind of summarize the questions and ask the panel to handle them. Yes, very quickly. Go ahead, question?
I just hope that we consider, suppose everything comes in, we get the high-speed pipe, the gigabite to everybody's house. Are there any negative ramifications of that happening?
And your name?
Clark Simone.
Yeah. Negative ramifications. And then your quick question?
Yeah, I just wonder if there are any case studies, economic studies from some of these other communities that have improved their bandwidths where we could take to our own town and say, these are how many jobs you would bring in and that sort of thing. The benefit is obvious to me as a telecommuter, but what do we tell the town?
Pat McLeod, the library director. We don't have to leave at 7:45. I'm here, so I'll leave when you leave. But my concern or question is, we're all about education and community literacy, early childhood education. And are there grants that we could get to be able to find this entity or be able to fund this entity, to be able to hook up the library, the Harper Center, the police, fire, wherever these hubs are? I mean, we have 2 lines down in our basement, and I'm using just one. And what are the opportunities? I don't have the money. The town doesn't have the money. But are there grants available for broadband initiatives in rural areas?
So for now, have we exhausted the questions in the audience?
Nope.
Okay, one last.
Yep. Vivian Jaffe, I just wanted to know before this meeting ends, what would be the next step?
Okay, we'll handle
another meeting.
All right, so let me summarize the questions that I think we heard very quickly and then ask.
One more thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm Sandra Thomas. I live in North Adams, but I'm on the Williamstown Economic Development Committee, and there are a few of us here from the committee tonight. Now is the time for input for the Economic Development Committee, who's coming up with a plan. So that's partly to answer your question, but we're listening. So
great. Questions I heard was a question about what might we expect in terms of cost. What is actually the project that needs to be undertaken? Let's not leave out North Adams and the rest of the region. What about the possibility of some kind of center, a physical center, or a cohort of people who are interested in this stuff? How do we represent the people who are not here? What is a discussion of, is it really the case that cellular is definitively inferior, or is there more study of that question? What is to be done next? Are there any case studies out there of towns like this that have been dealing with this problem? And are there grants available? And next steps, of course.
So for cost, so we haven't described what it is or its shape or its color or anything. So we can't really say what the cost is. But what we can do is a mental exercise, and these guys can say whether or not it's a valid exercise. Is look at Leverett and realize that our density is actually much more favorable to a cost reduction than Leverett. So if you see Leverett and you say, oh, well, it'll be cheaper than Leverett, you're probably right.
So maybe less than $85 a month
per person for 30 years?
For 1 gigabit service, for service 100 times.
Well, there's 2 things. There's the build-out cost, and then there's the provisioning cost of I now need internet service. And so Leverett has broken that out, and I think it's like $250 a year for the build-out cost of Leverett, and I think it's for 30 years.
About $300.
Yeah, and then it's like $85 for the service, or $95?
If I may, in Leverett, there are 2 components to the bill that we issue to every subscriber every month. One component is called the MLP fee, Municipal Light Plant Fee. That's the amount that Leverett MLP needs to collect to operate the network.
It's also the first step, is Williamstown should form an MLP.
For sure. It makes
That
life
stands for Municipal Light
Plant.
Plant, but actually it wouldn't be doing lights, it would be doing
Correct.
internet.
Correct.
It's just
But
that
it
that's the
operates-
legal form that works in the state.
Yeah, it operates under Chapter 164, which was originated for electricity, but in I think 96 or in that time frame, incorporated telecommunications as well.
Mm-hmm.
So in Leverett, the MLP fee, which operates the network, is based on 8 or 9 or 10 line items of things they have to cover, costs they have to cover every given year. You take that and you divide it by 12 and divide it by the number of subscribers, and that becomes your MLP fee, a line item on the bill we issue. That's right now about $49. We expect that to settle in at about $42 once all the costs are identified and the number of subscribers stabilizes. On top of that, you have the service fee. In Leverett, Crocker charges $24.95 for a gigabit connection, unlimited usage of internet service. So if you're just interested in internet in Leverett, your bill currently is $75 a month. It'll probably settle in at about $70 a month. And after 30 years, you know, the bond is paid for. But Leverett chose not to recover the to cover its debt through its fees to its subscribers. It's purely a tax-based payback of the bond over 30 years. So after over 30 years, that falls away. Who knows to be replaced by what? But the network is paid for entirely out of tax revenues. So the subscriber gets a bill for $75. If they want to do double play, then
Double play?
double play is internet and phone service. You add $20 to that, so $75 currently goes to $95. For that, you get unlimited local and long distance calling in the 48 states, Canada and Puerto Rico, excellent rates, usually 3 cents per minute to the rest of the world. You get full features, every feature you can possibly think of that Verizon typically charges extra for, but we include, including voicemail, E911, caller ID, call forwarding, et cetera, et cetera.
Bill, in fairness to your competitor, Adam, is what you're hearing fairly similar to what you guys are doing in South County?
Well, we haven't deployed a last mile yet.
Okay.
Leverett was one of the first in the area to do that.
Okay.
It does not sound out of line at all. Every
Okay.
town is different, and especially if the town is funding it through a bond issue, that price and cost to build that network is going to vary. But the rest of it, yeah, absolutely. It's right in line with everything that we're discussing and everything that most providers would.
So if I could just finish up,
real quick, yeah.
what I would recommend is you deal with building the network separately from selecting your service provider and network operator, and build the network, have it be a town asset. The town owns it, the town controls it, the town brands it any way they want. There's town pride involved. It helps the subscription rate, helps get votes passed. And then you go out to bid and find the best network operator service provider that you can, and then have a contract where if you don't like them, you can get rid of them 3 years or even sooner.
It's like, we should think of it as our water, sewer, or road
Absolutely.
network.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely, are you,
John?
He's mentioned several times, we think this will settle in at a number. Know that in the telecom space, it's like our water system here. They are fixed costs. The costs are largely fixed. So the more users you have consuming more of it, the lower the per unit cost. It's a simple piece of economics. The more users, the lower per unit cost. So if a town like Leverett had only 30% of its potential subscribers subscribe, it never would have built the system. It needed big numbers. The more the merrier. So when we talk about North Adams, I mean, there's a reason why Berkshire Connect became Western Mass Connect. We were muscling up and aggregating demand so we could try to find solutions together. it's got a political reality as well as an economic reality. Unless you get more involved, you don't get it done. It's just that simple. So it's the politics and the economics of this mirror one another in their fundamental dynamics.
Has that been true on the Cape?
Well, I'm speaking actually larger than the Cape, because in other parts of the country, someone asked, are there case studies? And in the U.S. and Canada, there are, and there's lots of different models. So in some places, EDICs, EDCs, CDCs, they're not just committees, they have to be a legal entity, and they have to have the ability to borrow and manage. There's really specific legal things you need them to do. But they've addressed regional issues. So, for example, Axia might be familiar with this because one of the towns in Western Canada did this with their, and they took actually a regional approach. The economic development entity is closely aligned with the town, and it was the entity that went out and did this across multiple different towns for exactly the reason that you were just saying. So there's different models that I think are worth exploring.
And they employ a wireless model just because the topography allows.
Right. Does the Northern Berkshire Industrial Park and Development Corp still exist?
It does.
It does. Why couldn't it take this on as an initiative?
Because each town owns the right-of-way. Okay. You know, the reason why it was done the way it was is because it's too much of a rigmarole to do each individual town because of all of the idiosyncrasies of each individual town in Western Massachusetts. So it was just left at the town's doorstep as a way to finish it. It's the most practical solution.
However, you can have an MLP in one town, cooperate with an MLP in another, share costs, share the cost of a Crocker or a Berkshire Fiber in operating the.
So you could have an MLP in each of the towns that were shells and they have a manager.
And sign treaties that allow costs and capacities to be shared across and ignoring ultimately political boundaries. So there are ways to achieve the kinds of things that were talked about in Western Canada.
I can see from a business point of view how one could, shall we say, step up to a final solution that gets something taken care of on a regional basis and then rolls it out on a town-by-town basis.
So it's 6 minutes of 8 now, and I think we shouldn't indulge the librarian too much longer. So let's see, could I have people focus now on your ideas for next steps and be expansive about that idea. And we're being recorded, both audio and video, so that'll get captured. So let's just shout out your ideas for next steps, and let's collect those as quickly as we can. Yeah.
So I'm curious, you know, Williamstown's an older town. How do you sell this to someone who's over 60, since we have cable TV here? To me, that seems like the problem. Like, there needs to be some way I could sell it to someone over 60 who already can watch TV.
I'd ask them. I think that.
Are there any case studies of how it works?
I think you'd be surprised at how informed that demographic is about what the technology will bring. I think you'd be surprised at what the demographic knows. Huge.
Greatly that was huge in Leverett.
It was huge in Leverett.
To be able to have a live conduit to a physician or a specialist without having to leave your home and have a meaningful discussion and checkup online, that's a huge thing.
And you really can't have that now with asymmetrical access, as you know as a technology guy. You know, I'm 61, and frankly, I don't even want cable service anymore. I just want broadband, because I am in this world and I'm seeing every day the announcements of all the content providers who are now jumping the switch from the cable and starting to stream directly to the internet. Within a few years, I think most people are going to realize that they don't need cable anymore, but they do need a connection from the cable company to the internet.
Oh, it's here now. That's here now. I'm sorry.
Well, I think people 60 are getting that pretty quickly. Yeah. Yes. Concrete next step ideas.
Yeah, I guess I appreciate the panel's views on the next step of how would you define the scope of the project? How would you do the financials on it? Is this a matter of hiring a consultant, doing RFP? You know, Ben's got notes I know in his head, but if we wanted to sell this to community, we kind of need to know exactly what we're doing, and this has been a level above that. So I just want to know, what's the process for trying to figure out what we're building and how you'd actually come up with these cost estimates?
Does someone like a Crocker help with that? Is that part of what your divisions do?
Crocker is involved now in helping towns identify their operating costs. But we're not involved in helping them identify their build costs because MBI is caring for that. And they're doing a very good job of it. So someone would have to step in and play the role that, MBI is currently playing in a lot of the hill towns that don't have any cable TV. And then we would be more than happy to help craft a model with no strings attached that identifies the cost, the ongoing costs of operating it, insurance, poll license fees, things like that.
I would rather start with what I think is the right thing to do for the town and let, you know, some consultant or whatnot tear that apart. To me, that seems to make the most sense because I've already made a lot of designs for what a network should be, so that it seems to me submitting that to a consultant to have them critique what that is would be the most efficient thing to do, rather than have them start from scratch.
We have done just that. We've been working with the town of Alford on their designs, and you know, we've been communicating with a lot of contractors about the designs and costs and build costs. So I think all the providers...
And he submitted quotes to me, so...
It might be nice to know what those designs are.
Well, the thing is, you know, are we going to talk about network topology in this meeting?
No, actually, I actually want to raise one thing, because I think you asked about needs, you asked about funding, and you asked about models. So I come back to needs again, because if you can define certain needs, there's funding tied to certain needs. For example, the other day I was looking at some information about rural grants tied to 21st century healthcare. If you identify healthcare as being a priority application for the community, are there strands, grant funding that ties to that? Those are the kinds of questions you need to explore.
Right, but those aren't likely to change the design of the network.
Bill,
you know, the network's going to be the same design whether it's carrying healthcare data or cable television or Netflix. Yeah, well, pay for it is another plan altogether. I think first you design it and then you figure out what it is.
We usually take a couple different steps. One would be sort of this desktop model where, you know, we look at the town as a whole, just on a map, and we look at what the course build-out would look like. From there, we can build sort of a budgetary number to come back with, at which point, if it looks like we can move forward, you can start to get down into the nitty-gritty of actually visiting the communities, actually looking at what the topology looks like, what the ground looks like, you know, are we putting on poles,
what the pole network
underground?
looks like,
As a
cost of make ready and the rest.
As a design, my company typically tries to go underground. That has some cost. We typically try to go underground. As a cost, it definitely incurs more cost.
Which is what our neighborhood pilot project is.
Yeah, we've been talking with Ben about underground service.
You can take a series of steps on the design piece. Andy, you clearly need some design expertise so that we have something to look at and criticize and ask questions about, et cetera, and begin to look at what's the CapEx involved, capital expenditure involved. In this universe, you got to think about two kinds of money. One is operating expenses, the sustainability of something over time, your ability to pay for what you need or want, and you've got to look at that carefully. And the other one is the capital cost. What's it cost just to build it, and then over time, what are the recurring repairs, et cetera, and so on. So I think there are plenty of firms that do the desktop model. In fact, they all talk that way. They rough it out, and then they go out and do more detailed work. But it's a serial process. It's a serial process, and done by lots of folks. And MBI has a long list of capable firms that can do that kind of work.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up in a couple of minutes, so go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that we're talking in grand generalities here. I think that for the next steps, it's going to be important to determine whether what we're trying to do is to build out a gigabit level network all the way to the resident door, the last mile. If we're trying to build out gigabit level networking to the town and to the businesses with the prospect of then rolling it out to the residences. Whether we're talking about just getting gigabit to the region rather than the town. And let me just finish. Let me finish.
Okay.
Okay? The point is that we need to figure that out. And that's the reason that I was asking you that hard question, because you're talking generalities and we need to get down to specifics here. What is it that we really want? Do we want gigabit to the door of our homes? Do we want it to our businesses? Do we want just to get it to the region so that we can then roll it out to businesses and
It's already in the region.
I understand it's already in the region, but
Yeah. So
they're not interested.
Has everybody put their contact information on the legal pad that's circulating? Because anybody who's on there, I will put you on an email list, and there'll be some kind of a follow-up email about this meeting, so you won't lose threads here. Also, if you remember, GreylockIndependent.com or Greylock or GreylockNews.com or newsshare.com/broadband. Any of those links will find you to information about tonight's session, including more detail about a lot of the things that were talked about. And at willynet.org. Thank you very much. And I will make sure that you all get a link to the archived stream of this when Debbie and her team get it pulled together. Thank you to our cameraman.
Willie,
Just real quick, Bill Moriarty. Truth be known, I work for Time Warner Cable.
Oh, good.
But that has, I don't represent them here in any way. To narrow down some of these questions, the topography of Leverett, I'm not familiar with, but how much was the build out for Leverett?
$3.6 million.
Okay, so that gives you an idea. I don't know if it's bigger or smaller than Williamstown, but you're talking about $3 or $4 million for the infrastructure to be put in place.
Got it.
That's answering some of those questions.
1,487 poles, 47 route miles, 800 dwellings.
800 dwellings, that's the key, 800 dwellings.
820 dwellings, fiber connected to every home, whether they subscribe or not.
And owned by the town when it's done, not owned by...
But they're paying utility pole rent. They're paying utility pole rent. So when I looked at this, I realized that you can't really get a straight answer out of the utility pole companies on how much it will cost to actually run the fiber. So you're actually better off being able to plan, you know, a trench or a digging because you get an actual hard number. You don't get, you know, amorphous legal battles with, you know, entities that could care less. So, you know, they're using utility poles and then they have an extra cost yearly to pay the rental on that. Whereas if we buried it, you know, it would be buried and there would be no cost.
Right.
Could I have a quick show of hands of people who would come to another meeting on this subject if we planned one? Okay.
Are we supposed to raise our hand?
That's good to know. So, as long as you're, okay, all right. As long as you're on the email list, there'll be more to come on this. So you've been listening to a conversation about connections. It's June 10th. We're at the Milne Public Library in Williamstown. Thank you to our guests, and I'm going to say quickly, again, who's here so that those of you who are watching us on television know. From the left, from my left, Don Dubendorf, Ben Greenfield from COGS, Adam Chiat from Berkshire Fiber Connect, Mark Bouvier from Axia NG Networks, Bill Stathis from Crocker Communications, and Teresa Martin.
Representing herself.
Representing herself, but who gets the award for driving 4 hours in each direction to be here tonight. So thank you very much for that. Good night, everybody.